Greetings to all our viewers tuning in to our channel. Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in economic history whose full weight only becomes clear once the wheels have already begun turning. Decisions that may seem like little more than sound bites for the cameras or catchy slogans from a campaign trail can in fact send shockwaves rippling across thousands of miles, reaching into every factory, every assembly line, and every working family. When Donald Trump declared that every car sold on American soil should be made in America and that he was willing to tear down the old trade order to make it happen, many dismissed it as more of the same. Bold, attention-grabbing rhetoric that would eventually dissolve into endless rounds of negotiation. But what's now unfolding across North America tells a different story. This wasn't just a throwaway line. It was the opening salvo in a full-scale reshaping of the largest auto industry in the Western Hemisphere. A single statement can rattle an entire sector, but a policy enforced with full determination can shake an entire continent. The mere suggestion of a 25% tariff on vehicles and parts from Canada was enough to send shockwaves through the markets. Behind what might seem like dry statistics lies something far more tangible. Over 5 million jobs on the line, tens of billions of dollars in export revenue teetering on the edge, and a cross-border manufacturing network that has ticked like clockwork for more than half a century now, facing the threat of disruption in a matter of months. The most alarming part isn't the tariff itself, but the fundamental misunderstanding of how this industry is structured, where the U.S. isn't the unchallenged leader it believes itself to be, and where Canada is no longer a silent partner in the background, but a strategic link that could send the entire system careening off course. In that moment, people began to ask, is the American auto industry really as strong as the slogans suggest? Or beneath that confident exterior, are there long-standing cracks that have been quietly spreading for years? To understand how a single policy could spark such a seismic shift, and why both Washington and Ottawa are scrambling to respond, we must start at the very root of it all. A deep structural imbalance that has plagued the U.S. auto industry for over 2 decades. A fracture that has silently widened and can no longer be hidden. And that brings us to the next part of this analytical journey, the structural fault line of the American auto industry, the origin of all the tensions now rocking North America. For more than 2 decades, the American auto industry hasn't just been struggling. It's been living with a slow-burning wound that has never truly healed. The ever-widening trade deficit reads like a silent indictment, revealing a truth many Americans would rather not face. The industry that once symbolized the strength of the United States has lost its own rhythm. In 2023, the U.S. imported $388 billion worth of vehicles and parts, but exported only $74 billion. That gap is no longer just a typical trade imbalance. It's a glaring sign of a dangerously lopsided structure. It tells us that America is consuming more than it produces, is more dependent than it believes, and is losing its central role in the North American value chain. It's from this anxiety that a wave of discontent has surged through the American political sphere. To them, this is clear proof that Canada and Mexico have reaped too many benefits from the USMCA agreement, while the US, the main consumer of these products, has been left holding the short end of the stick. In that climate, Donald Trump chose a hardline path, a 25% tariff on vehicles and auto parts from Canada. On the surface, this move carried the tone of a fairness reset, an attempt to force supply chains back into the US, create jobs, and protect American workers. But the reality is, the modern auto industry does not operate along geographic lines or economic nationalism slogans. It operates like a single living organism, where any blow to one part sends tremors throughout the whole body. A car assembled in Michigan might contain dozens of components made in Ontario. Conversely, a finished vehicle in Canada might rely on an engine or transmission built in the US. Parts cross the border 5, 7, even 15 times before the final car rolls off the line. The supply chain is optimized to such a degree that even a minor disruption can halt the entire operation. That's why imposing tariffs on Canada isn't just a strike against Canada. It's a strike at the very heart of American manufacturing. Every new tariff adds friction to a machine already spinning at maximum speed. The result? Costs go up, car prices rise by thousands of dollars, consumers feel the squeeze, and U.S. factories face disruption, not from foreign competitors, but from their own government's policies. Behind that structural crack lies a fascinating paradox. The U.S. is both the largest net importer in the auto sector and one of the most deeply reliant nations on its neighbors for production inputs. It wants to break free from that dependency, yet every aggressive move only casts that dependency into sharper relief. And as Washington trains its sights on Canada, convinced that Ottawa is taking too much from the value chain, it forgets one staggering truth. Canada isn't just a manufacturing partner. Canada is the largest, most stable, and most influential customer of the American auto industry. That brings us to a reality Americans have overlooked for years, and to a lever Ottawa has quietly held all along. It is Canada that has the power to determine the fate of dozens of factories across the U.S. And now that America has chosen confrontation, the question becomes, what happens if Canada decides to strike back? For years, when people talked about the North American auto industry, Canada was often described as an extended workshop of the United States, a supporting manufacturer, a satellite orbiting within America's economic gravity. But the reality is quite the opposite. Canada doesn't just manufacture for the US, it also buys more from the US than any other country in the world. And that fact creates a powerful leverage that Washington has long underestimated. In 2024, Canada imported nearly $92 billion worth of automobiles. Over half of that, more than $55 billion, came directly from American factories. There is no other market the US can look to as a substitute of that scale. Europe has a fiercely strong and protected auto industry. Japan and South Korea have little interest in American vehicles. China has become an export powerhouse, no longer a buyer, but a seller. That leaves only Canada, close, stable, wealthy, and with a decades-long habit of buying American-made cars. But Canadian loyalty to US vehicles isn't unconditional. They buy American cars because they're reasonably priced, easily accessible, and well-suited to Canada's climate and geography. If tariffs suddenly add several $1,000s to the price of American cars, if confidence in US products starts to falter, a shift in consumer behavior becomes entirely plausible. If Canadians cut their purchases of US vehicles by just 20%, the US would instantly lose $11 billion in export revenue. A 40% drop would mean over $22 billion lost, enough to send multiple American factories into reduced operations or even temporary shutdowns. What's more, Canada has plenty of alternatives. Japanese and Korean brands already dominate the passenger vehicle market. Germany is pushing hard to export high-end electric cars. Even Mexico, with low costs and proximity, is always ready to fill any market void. And more dangerous still is the growing presence of cheap electric vehicles from China. Canada hasn't imposed the same strict barriers as the US or Europe. If Canadian consumers get used to Chinese EVs priced at half the cost of American models, the shift could become permanent. That is the leverage Ottawa holds. There's no need to retaliate with tariffs, no need to launch an all-out trade war. Simply allowing the market to adjust or issuing a symbolic public appeal could be enough to throw the US auto industry into disarray. Because when your biggest customer changes their buying habits, the impact hits manufacturers first, directly and painfully. But Canada's power is only part of a much larger picture, because an even more alarming truth lies ahead. The American auto industry, a highly sophisticated machine, can be brought to a standstill by a single malfunctioning link. Sometimes just 1 hour of supply chain disruption is enough to cause millions of dollars in losses. That's why, as this trade confrontation escalates, the real question isn't just how Canada will respond. It's whether the massive industrial engine of the United States can withstand even the smallest collisions. And that brings us to the next chapter, where we confront the startling fragility of the American supply chain. The American auto industry has long taken pride in its speed and efficiency. Parts arriving just in time, assembly lines running smoothly, inventories kept near zero. But it's this very just-in-time philosophy that has turned the US manufacturing system into a massive machine running at the edge of its limits. All it takes is one delayed shipment, one part stuck at the border, one Canadian supplier disrupted by new tariffs, and the whole line starts to falter. Not in days, not even in hours, but but in minutes. A factory in Detroit might churn out hundreds of vehicles a day, but if it's missing a circuit board from Quebec, a brake assembly from Ontario, or an aluminum frame from Windsor, the line grinds to a halt. Every hour of downtime means millions of dollars evaporate, thousands of workers put on hold, and a ripple effect of delays rippling through every supplier behind them. In the auto world, time isn't money, it's blood. Just 60 minutes of disruption can paralyze a plant. A full day can throw the entire national system into chaos. When Washington imposed tariffs on cars and auto parts from Canada, it didn't just raise costs, it created an invisible wall right at the most critical intersection of the supply chain. Containers face tighter inspections, paperwork stretches longer, unexpected fees pile up, creating small but constant bottlenecks. And in a system tuned so finely that there's no room for error, those small delays quickly explode into major shocks. We've seen this before. When the US slapped tariffs on aluminum and steel in 2018, the average price of a car rose between $800 and $1,400, but that was just a hit to raw materials. This time, with tariffs aimed directly at assembled vehicles from Canada, a hub that dozens of US factories rely on, the impact could be double, even triple. And here lies the cruel irony. The very states that once cheered protectionist policies for promising to bring jobs home are now facing job losses first. Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, core assembly hubs may soon see lines go idle, not for lack of orders, but for lack of parts from their oldest trade partner. And when one line stops, it never stops alone. The disruption ripples upstream to suppliers, spreads to transporters, hits auxiliary firms, and loops back to the labor market. That domino effect doesn't just raise car prices, it erodes America's competitiveness right on its own turf. Meanwhile, the global market doesn't wait for the US to sort itself out. On the contrary, it's always poised to fill any gap America leaves behind. And right now, that gap is growing faster than many realize. As the US supply chain chokes from within, global rivals with steady production, lower costs, and more flexible strategies are seeing golden opportunity. Japan, South Korea, Germany, and especially China are all ready to step into the position the US is slowly vacating. And what happens if they seize that opportunity? That's the story we're heading into next. As the United States stumbles over its own trade barriers, the rest of the world isn't sitting idly by. In fact, global competitors have been waiting for this moment for a long time. For decades, the Canadian market has been almost default territory for American cars, but now cracks are beginning to form in those consumption habits. And any shift, however small, creates a golden opening for other nations to step in. Japan, South Korea, and Germany are familiar names, but they hold a quiet advantage the US no longer possesses: stability. While America grows unpredictable, with constantly shifting policies and sudden tariff decisions, Japanese, Korean, and German manufacturers offer a sense of security to both Canadian consumers and distributors. They don't need to ramp up production or change their factories. They simply have to wait for American car prices to rise by a few $1,000s, and the market will naturally tilt in their favor. Canadian consumers already have a high level of trust in Japanese and Korean brands, from durability to fuel efficiency to lower maintenance costs. A slight slip in American price competitiveness is all it would take for them to shift their preferences. As for Germany, while it plays in the higher-end segment, it sees Canada as a launchpad to expand its premium electric vehicle market, one where the US is currently distracted, torn between protectionist policies and internal market adjustments. But the most noteworthy and most alarming name in the picture is China. In less than a decade, China has risen to become the world's largest automobile exporter, surpassing both Japan and Germany. With over 5 million vehicles exported in 2023, many of them affordable electric cars, China is aggressively moving into markets where America has left vulnerabilities. And Canada is one of those markets. Unlike the US or EU, Canada has yet to erect strong barriers against Chinese vehicles. This opens the door wide for EVs that cost half the price of American cars to flood the market. If Canadian consumers get used to the convenience and affordability of these options, the US won't just lose market share, it may lose it permanently. In the auto industry, once consumer habits are formed, they are notoriously hard to reverse. In this landscape, all it takes is one misstep from the US, and the world rushes to fill the gap. And when Canadian consumers start seeing more choices, cheaper, more diverse, and in some cases more advanced, America won't just lose sales. It will lose its strategic foothold in one of its most critical markets. But this story isn't just about rivals moving in. The more important truth is this: Canada is not a helpless bystander caught between global powers. It has the capability to turn turmoil into advantage and the foundation to reshape the game in its favor. And when we look deeper into Ottawa's strategy, it becomes clear Canada is not simply defending against America's blow. It is preparing to turn this crisis into a moment of reinvention for the future of its own auto industry. To many Americans, Canada is seen merely as a dependent partner, a small market, an extended manufacturing arm, a peaceful neighbor. But when we look deeper into the structure of Canada's industrial base, it becomes clear that Canada is anything but passive. It holds forms of leverage that few countries possess: a consumer market large enough to sustain a full production ecosystem, a strategic geographic location, and an industrial model built on the kind of stability that global investors crave. And in the trade earthquake triggered by Washington, Ottawa sees not just risk, but a rare opportunity to reshape its own future. The first key lies in the power of Canadian consumers themselves. If they simply shift their preferences to vehicles assembled right in Ontario, from Honda, Toyota, GM, or Ford, domestic factories would have more than enough demand to keep running at full capacity. This shift wouldn't require bold declarations or aggressive policy mandates, just a wave of public discourse, a soft government message encouraging North American preference without being bound by America, and the market would start to self-correct. Once domestic demand stabilizes, Canada becomes far less vulnerable to shocks from the South. Second, Canada's supply network is far more diversified than many realize. Japan, South Korea, Germany, Mexico all already have production facilities and distribution chains operating in Canada. If imports from the US decrease, Canada has immediate alternatives without needing to build from scratch. This pivot not only reduces dependence on the US, but strengthens Canada's long-term resilience. In an increasingly unstable world, diversified supply is the most powerful form of security. And most importantly, Canada is emerging as an attractive destination for global investment. As the US continues to shift its policies unpredictably, with legal and economic uncertainty clouding the landscape, multinational corporations are searching for a safer place to anchor their production. Canada, with its transparent legal system, stable tax environment, skilled labor force, and strong commitment to clean energy, is quickly rising to the top of that list. This is a golden moment for Ottawa to attract battery plants, EV R&D centers, and high-tech component factories. These investments won't just boost production capacity, they'll elevate Canada's position on the global industrial map. If Canada can seize the moment, it won't just be playing defense, it will take a major step forward. This kind of initiative allows Canada to approach the 2026 USMCA renegotiations with an unprecedented level of confidence. For the first time, Canada won't be the side trying to preserve the status quo. It will be the one with real leverage. Because even a slight shift in the Canadian market can force the entire US auto sector to adjust course. When a country long viewed as modest begins to flex its soft power, the regional balance begins to shift. And that shift won't stop at the auto industry. It signals something much larger, the beginning of a broad restructuring across North America, where every link, every trade flow, every source of competitive advantage could start to move. And it's here that the story turns to a new chapter. What happens to the future of the continent when trust, the foundation of 60 years of cross-border cooperation, begins to shake? That's the question we'll explore in the next part. If the confrontation between Washington and Ottawa continues to escalate, North America could enter a period of irreversible transformation. For more than half a century, this continent has operated on a foundational belief. Borders may divide land, but they cannot divide supply chains. Yet now, a single unilateral decision from the US has begun to fracture that belief. And once trust starts to erode, every industrial link once thought to be unbreakable becomes vulnerable to unraveling. The future of North America, then, could see a sweeping reconfiguration. Cross-border supply chains, long held as symbols of efficiency and integration for over 60 years, may fragment into smaller, less connected, and far more expensive segments. American factories will no longer be able to rely on the seamless, cost-effective flow of parts from Canada and Mexico. Their production will slow, costs will rise, and their competitive edge against Asia and Europe will steadily shrink. In the electric vehicle era, where cost and speed of innovation determine everything, this could prove to be a crippling blow. At the same time, Canada stands at the threshold of a very different path. It can shift its focus toward electric vehicles, clean energy, and green technology, sectors that global corporations see as the future of mobility. Mexico, too, may seize this disruption as a chance to strengthen its role as the continent's largest low-cost manufacturing hub. And beyond North America's borders, China, with its unmatched production capacity and rapidly expanding strategy, is poised to move into the very space the US might be vacating. But the most unsettling shift isn't just in production, it's in perception. When Canada and Mexico no longer see the US as a reliably stable partner, and when American businesses no longer assume the borders will always remain open, the entire North American economic structure, from trade and energy to defense and high-tech industries, could experience a chain reaction. A continent once built on harmony may soon find itself needing to rebuild on a foundation of mistrust. And if that happens, the biggest question won't be where North America is headed, but whether the United States is truly prepared to pay the steep price of a strategy that may not yield long-term gain. Because sometimes a decision made in the name of strength can unintentionally open the door to a redistribution of power that America never intended and may ultimately regret. Ladies and gentlemen, as we look back on everything that's unfolding, we can't help but ask, is the United States making a bold strategic move, or are they unknowingly setting the stage for a historic mistake that will be remembered for decades to come? Washington's intentions aren't hard to grasp. They want to protect domestic jobs, revive an industry once considered the pride of the nation, and reclaim dominance over partners they believe have benefited too much. But sometimes, the most dangerous threat isn't that our rivals grow stronger, it's that we misread our own vulnerabilities. By building a tariff wall against Canada, the US has triggered shockwaves through its own manufacturing engine. They want to bring supply chains back to Michigan, Ohio, Tennessee, yet fail to realize those chains rely on thousands of parts that come from across the border. They want to protect the domestic market, but forget that their most important customer is the Canadian consumer. And they want to showcase economic strength, but instead, the world is witnessing the fragility of a supply chain once thought untouchable. Meanwhile, Canada, long perceived by many Americans as the weaker side, is seizing this moment to restructure its industry, attract new investment, diversify its trade relationships, and elevate its standing on the continent. If this trajectory continues, North America may no longer revolve around Washington as it once did. A new order is taking shape, and the question now is, who will truly lead this continent in the decade ahead? As we wrap up today's analysis, we invite you to reflect and share your thoughts in the comments below. Is this a smart strategic move by the United States, or a miscalculation that could cost them their long-term advantage? Your perspective helps us continue to dive deeper into critical global topics in future videos. And if you found this content valuable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming geopolitical insights. Thank you for watching and being part of the conversation.